Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery Programming Series for our current show, In Ohio, curated by Shar Norman. Today, we are thrilled to present artist Meryl Engler. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Please feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions. We'll be sure to get to it at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. And all right, welcome, Meryl.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in this artist talk. I am an artist based in Akron, Ohio, using woodcut to create kind of layered pieces, thinking about kind of the magic and kind of our environment and human interaction. So I'll take you through a little trip through my journey. And I am originally from Southern California. I grew up in Huntington Beach in Orange County. So this was my view every day. And the ocean and the waves definitely continue to inspire me in my work, in the movement of the water, in the way the light kind of hits and dances off the water. And you'll see that a lot in when I kind of go through my grad school work. I think I was landlocked in Nebraska and wanting to kind of be at the ocean. So for undergrad, oh, this is another sunset view. So this is where I grew up, and this is where I decided to go to school for undergrad at Syracuse University. I basically decided to be cold and in the snow forever, and I really loved it there. But it's going to be a kind of a running joke. So I went to Syracuse, and that's where I started to learn woodcut. This is the very first woodcut I ever did. And I taking the printmaking class as an elective. I was a sculpture major, and it was kind of the first time that the thing that was in my brain as a student happened on the paper. And that was just really amazing and fulfilling. And I fell in love with it right away and became quite obsessed with it. I think it's hard for undergrad students when you don't have resources, you don't have knowledge of a lot of techniques. We have very grand ideas and don't know how to actually make it happen. So woodcut kind of allowed me to do that, which was really exciting. This is also from my first woodcut class. We did a 7 by 3 foot piece. You'll notice throughout the talk, I do like to work large. I'm a big physical person. And I really like that physical act of carving, of printing large, and that kind of immersive experience. And it started really back in undergrad. And we did this with a steamroller, which is really exciting. So it's always a fun time. And then this was also from that intro class in undergrad, thinking more about installation and pattern. Um, Pattern will show up a ton in my work going kind of throughout. So just thinking about how things that I still think about have these roots in when I was, an undergrad and not really knowing all the possibilities and having life experiences, they keep kind of that thoroughfare throughout the whole of my journey. And then this was I think be considered a thesis. So still more patterns. And then I translated that to site-specific installation. So this was done in salt with a stencil. And I did not get permission to do this on our quad, but I did it anyway. So that was scary. But really thinking about pattern and form and shape and starting to get a little bit more abstract in my work at this time. The other thing that took up a lot of my time and energy in undergrad was rowing. So I rowed for Syracuse for 4 years. I also did track and field for a year. And I think the repetitive motion of rowing, the kind of pattern of the puddles, there's a rhythm to it. It's very physical. It's like the ultimate team sport too. So you're kind of this one thing in a machine that needs that boat to go forward. um, Became very important in my work, especially kind of after this and going into undergrad. So, and I'll never look this cool in photos ever again. So I had to show them off. Okay. For grad school, I decided to go to University of Nebraska Lincoln, which is another very cold place. Um, And there, uh, Karen Kuntz was still a professor. She has since retired. And she was sort of my mentor in taking me from someone that just really liked woodcut and carving to someone that was thinking about color and form and paper and shape. And so I think seeing these kind of examples of her more abstract nature, um, very layered pieces, you'll see the influence in the work that I was making in grad school. And her woodcuts are just so amazing. And you just kind of stare at them and wonder how the layering works. It's really, really interesting. So in grad school, I started to play a lot more with color, with layering different wood blocks on top of each other, um, with different types of blending and inking. And I worked more abstractly. I needed it to be almost like very immediate on the block. I didn't want to spend time trying to draw and work on proportions. And that, of course, has changed, but I needed it to be just like immediate and to be color and to just kind of like happen. It was grad school, it's very frantic and you need it to be there. So this kind of like the rhythm aspect of it, the pattern aspect of it, I think a lot of it had to do with water. I was in a landlocked state for the first time. Um, so I was really playing around with that type of stuff. And then, of course, I continued to work large. This is a collage that's based off of a wave crashing and playing around with paper and texture. And just, I really love the immersive feeling that working large can give you and the viewer as they approach the work that is like either life size or larger than life size. And this was another piece. This piece is actually just the carved blocks that were then painted, and it was installed on the floor. So it was meant to be kind of like a reflecting pool. So you can kind of look down on it and see the different colors as if like different lights were kind of coming through it. So after grad school, I moved to Portland, Oregon, which looks like this. So it was beautiful weather. It still snowed. It was still cold. It still rained. So I wasn't quite back at the beach. But I decided to go into coaching rowing full time in Portland. And I really didn't make art seriously for 3 years. And it was a strange time because like, you're busy trying to form a life, but then in the back of my brain, it was like I needed it. It was definitely missing. And while I loved being on the water, I I was missing having that serious form of art, that community of artists. Portland is a great place for that, but unless you kind of are in the network, it's difficult. So that's what brings me to Akron, which looks like this. So now I'm back in the snow. Uh, and I'm back in the snow forever. I've come to terms with it. So I came to Akron for a 1 year residency at Rubber City Prints in the fall of 2019. And I was supposed to be here for a year. The pandemic started in the middle of that. And so I stayed and I just really fell in love with the area. Um, I fell in love with the people. I started to create a home, and it's been a really great experience kind of being in one place for longer than just a few years and kind of establishing myself again as an artist, kind of finding myself again as an artist. So when I moved to Akron, my mom, and this is something that you'll see going forward, started doing these Bargello quilts, which are really cool, kind of optical illusion-y quilts. If you see it flat, it looks like it's undulating, but it's just the pattern on the quilt. So I became sort of obsessed with these quilts that she was making and thinking about the pattern. So I did my own version of it as a woodcut. And the this was my first woodcut that I had made in 3 years. And I was like, ooh, do I still know how to do this? And it it was really fun to kind of explore into that and kind of play with these quilt patterns. And it really made me start to think about not just the patterns themselves, but the kind of concept of taking something that my mom had made and using that in my work and what that kind of meant. Um, this kind of fiber art tradition that happens, that's kind of like a passed on from women to women. I don't know how to, I kind of can sew. I sewed before on a sewing machine. I've never made a quilt or anything like that, but this was kind of my way of interpreting what she has been giving me this whole time. And you'll see from now on kind of quilts start to pop up a lot in my work in different ways. And we'll point them out. And a lot of them are based on specific quilts, which I think is really interesting to think about. So I proved to myself that I could still do a woodcut when I first moved here. And being in a new place, I really like to explore and kind of find these moments that I call them hidden environments, just in the city. And I became really enamored with the kind of overgrown aspect of the city where there was almost like these vines and leaves were just growing everywhere on walls and on fences, and like they just couldn't be stopped. And my favorite time of year in Northeast Ohio is maybe like a couple of weeks ago in the spring, where it feels like one day it's this barren kind of landscape, and then it rains for like 4 straight days, and then you wake up the next day and everything is green, and it just happens all of a sudden. That's one of my favorite kind of moments, and you get these walls full of just leaves and vines. And so I documented when I first moved here, just every time that I saw some these quiet moments that I thought were beautiful that might be somewhat overlooked in the area. Um, I wanted to document them. And I think like these images have a lot of things that I've been interested in the entire time, like the repetition, the pattern, um, but starting to think of them as like these kind of like hidden magical moments. I think I have some more images. So just like trees or leaves just kind of growing down a wall, or a tree kind of getting entangled with chain link fence became just really intriguing to me. as images. And so I started to make work kind of based on these images. And I think it's on the next one. So you'll see the photo on the right, or on the left, sorry, gets translated into this piece. So just kind of playing with the colors, but using the form of the leaves and that kind of rhythm of it going down the wall, I was really excited about. And then the piece that was on the right gets translated into this piece where I'm kind of playing with that idea of entanglement, and having this kind of fence and the tree kind of cohabitating almost with the fence. Like the fence is holding it up, or is the tree holding the fence up? Sometimes you don't really know. So it's a really interesting thought to be like, how does the natural world kind of interact with these kind of man-made structures as well? And is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? So that's kind of what got me into a chain link fence series. The other thing that I started thinking about is how people interact with the chain link fence. And I was at one point thinking, like, as kids, whenever you walk along a fence, you kind of have to run your hands along it and get that kind of tactile feeling. And as kids, you're almost like hanging off of it. You want to grab on and see if it'll hold your weight. And so just kind of using that motion of grabbing on, being like a really strong emotive kind of stance. And this was my first time really using figures in my work again in earnest, and thinking about this kind of like human nature structure interaction that happens in these kind of moments that you're not really thinking about it happening. So, and then I have a couple different versions of this one, so I could kind of play around with using the same wood block, but treating it differently in terms of contrast, value, color, backgrounds, and getting very different pieces and different results. This is something that you'll see going forward, well, where I have kind of the one main image and I treat it a lot of different ways. And it's really exciting to kind of start using the woodcut more as a template rather than the finished piece in and of itself. This is more with that chain link fence. And once again, like still thinking about pattern and shape and these kind of patterns that naturally happen in the world, or that, it's man-made, but you're not really thinking about pattern maybe when you're making a fence. It's kind of a very like artist viewpoints of the world, artist perspective in a way. Once again, very different feels. You can see it's the same wood block, but just treated with different colors, different layering, and they form really unique pieces. And that's pretty exciting. I'm more excited about that than making an addition, what would be considered an addition, where every woodcut is the same. And you make like 10, 20, and you have the exact same pieces. I still do that, but to me, this part is more exciting to kind of play with. And then this was my first mural that I did. That's part of Rooms to Let in 2021, up in Cleveland. And it's this whole kind of festival where they take the outside, some of the inside of the buildings, and let artists do these installations and murals. And I wanted to experiment with using woodcut as a mural medium. So all of the flowers are done in woodcut, And then the chain link fence and the leaves and stuff were all stenciled. So I made giant 6 by 3 foot stencils of all the pieces of the chain link fence. But thinking of this idea of like kind of overgrowth and kind of these flowers overtaking the chain link fence and kind of leading to something beautiful. So this was a really fun kind of experiment for me and my first time kind of trying anything like this. Um, and then, we've already established I love working large. So mural is like, this was, I think, like 30 by 10, and then it wrapped around actually as well and interacted with other people's work, which was really exciting. So now I'll get into the work that is up at the Rife Gallery right now in the show Made in Ohio, and we'll kind of talk about what the woodcut process actually is. So in going with the theme of me exploring my new environment in Akron, this weird tree was in the back parking lot next to Rubber City Prints. And I'm pretty sure there's like poison ivy and poison oak in that bush, but I loved the way those branches just kind of popped out and came out of nowhere. And I would watch this tree like in the winter be bare. And I think this was kind of mid-spring where it was starting um to get its leaves and kind of grow. And I just thought that it was just really, it was almost like this memorial marker. So I decided to memorialize it in some woodcuts. And I started with it on a small scale. So these are 8 by 11 inches. And so I just made this like kind of small woodcut. And with these ones were really fun. I went and I hand colored them. So all of the kind of yellow that you see in this image was hand colored on with colored pencil marker. This is also done on handmade Tai Kozo washi, which is a Japanese paper making method. So that's a whole nother ordeal, but so fun. And I really got to kind of play around with color, with different kind of tones in the work. And these were just very fun and experimental little pieces, playing around with lighting and how that kind of works out. And so then, like any normal person, I decided to make a 4 by 8 rendition of this woodcut. So this is a piece of MDF board, so medium density fiber board. It's a good wood alternative for if you want to work large, because it's pretty cheap. I usually work on Baltic birch plywood, but basically I start off with the drawing, and this drawing took a very long time. And I am drawing with India ink and micron pens. So it's almost like an ink painting drawing where I'm using the brush and India ink to kind of get the image on the board itself. And for scale, here I am sitting next to it. And it kind of just kept growing and growing. And I really took my time with this drawing. I think this was the first time that I really allowed myself to be in the moment while drawing it, where I didn't want it to just like happen. In grad school, I needed it to be so immediate. And this was a lot more contemplative in the drawing process itself, because it's very complicated. And, I tried to draw every leaf, which I don't know if I would recommend, but it worked out. Here is another one in scale for in my garage studio. And there, the drawing is finally finished. You can see that everything that is black or kind of gray is going to be left behind. So I'm going to carve everything around those marks. And I think if you look up a little bit in the branches in this image, there's already been some carving happening. So with this piece, how I ended up doing it is I carved the top background just around all the branches. I wasn't really worried about the details on the leaves yet. So you can see all the little wood chips and some of my carving tools to the right. And then the leather strop is also there. And that I use, it has polishing compound on it. And every if you're a good printmaker, every like, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, you're kind of swiping your tool on that to keep it nice and sharp. So that's why that's there. And then you can see where the areas that are carved and the areas that aren't carved. And there's like a slight difference in the texture and the kind of tone of it. So it's a little bit hard to see. So, but I'm carving around the black areas that I have inked. And then because I had spent so much time on this, I'm getting as much use out of it as possible. I actually printed the top portion. And so this is just carved the background. So there's no details on the leaves. So it's more of a silhouette. But this is kind of what this type of carving will yield when you print it. And this is on like a really, really, really thin paper as well. So then I continued to carve and I started to carve out the details. You'll see in the kind of top part of the tree where those branches are coming out, it's stained a little bit. And that is from the prior inking when I did this. So the ink is going to stain it. And in between doing this, I shellac my wood blocks just to protect the wood itself from the moisture and ink and kind of cleaning and scrubbing. So, and that also gives me a little bit of tonal difference when I'm carving it. So I think this is pre-shellac. And then after I carved out the background, I shellacked it so that I could carve out the all of the details. So, but the having it stained is really nice. And a lot of artists will pre-stain their wood with either India ink or screen print ink or something, just so it's a little bit easier to see. And yeah, you can start to see in that kind of middle section, the leaves are getting carved out and kind of, it's almost like reverse cross hatching. So where your carving is going to be light. And so instead of taking a pen and using cross hatching to get your values, I'm taking a carving tool and just carving out the light values. And then once we get all carved, this was my first time printing it. So it's not perfectly printed on this image, and but it's good enough to show. Basically, I roll out the giant paper, and this one didn't quite go all the way to the end of the block. You can kind of see a little bit of it peeking out. I roll out the ink. I for this one, I rolled out the paper first just to get it lined up. And then I peeled back half of it. And then I inked with a roller the first half. And I don't have a video of that because I always forget. But just rolling out ink to get everything kind of coated. And then I'll put that first half of the paper back down. It's just a little bit easier to control when you're working this large. And then I'll go and I'll do the bottom half. So just inking it, because I use a little roller, it takes a long time. And then because I don't have a press that is 8 by 4 feet, I am printing by hand. There is a tool called a Baron that's kind of a disc shape that you can rub the back of the paper. And then the other tool that is the best to use is a spoon. Wooden spoons work really great. If you don't have a wooden spoon, a metal spoon will be fine. That's what I do. And just having the spoon is great because you can do greater pressure because it's a smaller area. So this is the first peel and reveal. So let's play the video. This part is always very exciting. You can just see him being very careful. This is a pretty transparent black ink, so it kind of comes out a little gray. And then I just slowly peel it back, and sometimes you have to let the paper, this is like a very fabric-y type paper. You just kind of got to let it do what it wants. And then I go inside and I put it on the floor. Like every person with a home studio, you have to figure out stuff. Okay. And then this is another reveal. This is on Japanese paper, so the print's gonna be a little bit more vibrant. And this paper was only 3 by 6 feet, so you can see it doesn't cover the whole block again. But let's play that. And this one I'm by myself, so you can see. You can see kind of how that looks like when I'm alone trying to reach around. Yeah, that first part's really scary. And then you're just slowly keeping the paper kind of taut. And it's every time it's magical to see the reveal. And you can see that it's a little bit more solidly in there with the ink. Usually the first couple prints with woodcut are a little bit less solid because the wood, even with the shellac, will still absorb a little bit. And then the pieces that are specifically in the show that's at Rife Gallery, you can see I'm working on the floor because what else? And I was experimenting with collaging the leaves. So I went in and I individually printed all the leaf sections and cut them out and mounted them on the print. And then some of them I was doing more color things. So you can see all these little leaf sections. And these were previous prints that were either kind of failure prints or that were just extra. I keep everything. I have a bin full of just paper scraps because I can't throw anything away. And you can see the kind of collage getting built up. And then the other piece, it's the same image, but this time in this more kind of like red, burnt orange color. And then I decided to collage the top part of the leaves. And this is on handmade orange paper that I made. I think it's abaca and cotton that I printed blue on top of. And it's a kind of a nice opaque blue. And then I individually cut those out and mounted them on. So it was really meticulous and meditative. I kind of almost really love the busy work where you're just like the thoughts were already made and now you're just like implementing them. And so it becomes this very like mindful experience. This is the red piece in the show has another layer of this self-portrait. And I started doing these life-size self-portraits as a way to kind of almost document my journey back into the art world in a way. And so she gets placed on top of one of the trees, and everything is modular and can be shown with or without. So it's kind of a fun kind of experimental way. But here you can see what the carving looks like before the inking happens. So on the left, and you'll see there is a difference between like the tone of the carved areas and the surface of the wood. That's just because of that shellac. But like I said, some people will dye the wood. And then it really comes to life when you ink it up. That's kind of like your first like really good view of what it's going to look like. So I wanted to show that. And then here's me peeling it off because like I said, peeling just never gets old. And I waved. Yeah, this paper is very like translucent, so that's why the lighting is a little bit crazy. And you'll notice I am wrapped in a quilt. And so that is a quilt that my mom made. Um, it's actually the back side of a quilt, and I'll show the front side shortly because I've used it in other work before. So thinking of myself kind of being wrapped in like that nurturing of family, of um something that like your mother has given you, but then you're also living 2,000 miles away. You're entering this new chapter of your life and you still kind of like have that little bit as protection. That's what I was really thinking about with the quilts on these. And I love the celestial pattern on it. So my mom makes good choices in her quilts. And you can see it gets placed on top. And then the final pieces in the show, once again, it's the same kind of template image of this tree, but just treated very different ways with very different results. So they become completely different pieces for me. And I really love the fact that woodcut can do stuff like this, where you can like, it gives a lot of room for experimentation because you're not having to necessarily come up with and create a completely new image. You kind of have a starting point almost, and then you can like just kind of shoot off from there. And I've done a couple different versions. I think I have like one other that I'll show. And this kind of is in a body of work where I started doing the self-portraits wrapped in quilts and kind of thinking of this awakening for me at this kind of like period of my life, and getting back into art and deciding to like make a life here in Akron. And so the fun part is everything is modular with this series. So this is another version of the tree. And then I have the other girl kind of emerging from it, or the tree kind of almost growing out of her. And then in this one, it's that same version of the tree. It's kind of gray. And then I started doing these herons. In mythology, herons are the messengers of the gods. So it's like the herons were coming to wake me up, get me going. And these are actually the wood blocks themselves. So they are the carved wood blocks. And working on this series really made it so that I could kind of play around and do stuff like this. Whereas like one day I show it with the girl, one day I show it with the herons. Like you can kind of almost mix and match depending on the space. It's almost like a site-specific installation at that point, or you're using the wall as your composition, which is super fun. And then the heron in this one is the print that came off of the wood block in the other one. And it gets layered on top of the tree. So it's really fun. And then this is a different tree. So each one, it has enough difference, but it's really exciting to kind of play around and almost use the wall as your paper to make a composition out of. This is another quilt on top of me that I'm kind of draped in, and then the heron's almost like a protector to wait for the right time to wake up kind of situation. You can see it's a little bit hard to tell, but there is like a face over on the left side. Another quilt piece. And then this is another version of that same tree with the same portrait, but this time I was trying to go for like a nighttime type vibe, or like the tree was kind of glowing from within. So it's just really fun to experiment, right? I've spent so long carving this very meticulous wood block, and now I get to instead of just making the same piece multiple times, I almost get to make different pieces each time. And then this is the quilt that that I've been using a lot that my mom made. I think it's a Hungarian design. We're not Hungarian, but that's okay. It still has a little bit of that Bargello type pattern that I showed before, where all of the colors are kind of like offset from each other. And it makes this really nice rhythm. And just once again, thinking of quilts as kind of this like nurture, protection, but also this kind of whimsical pattern that exists that we create in life. And so thinking of like the patterns that nature creates and the patterns that we create and how they interact. So the final thing that I'll talk about is my latest series of work, which is a slightly different process. It's called reduction woodcut. So this is more of a kind of making a traditional addition where every piece will be the same. And each color is a layer of carving. So I got really into kind of thinking of this kind of magical human moments. I'm going through a big fire kick right now. So, and then once again, you see my mom's quilt right there, and then the leaves kind of popping up out of nowhere behind them. But I'll take you through a quick version of the reduction process. So this is the final image. It's called Every Year They Grow from Nothing. And it started off as just kind of a line drawing. You can see just the drawing itself on the left. And then the first thing I did was I carved out everything that I wanted to be the white of the paper. So you can see that on the right. And then I printed the first layer on the left. Sorry, the pictures are a little bit bad. You can see some shadows. But I did something called selective inking, where you work with just smaller rollers and you can kind of ink separate colors in each area. So instead of printing the whole page one color, you kind of blend the colors and you get the first layer always looks bad. It's always just looks like a bunch of smudges. And I didn't record the carving of the second layer, but you can see from the left, that's the printed first layer. And on the right is the printed second layer. So after I print the first layer, I go back to the wood block, carve out everything that I want to be the colors on the left side. So that pale yellow in the background, I carve out those a little bit of the leaves. I carve out some of the quilt pattern. I carve out some of her face. I carve out some of the fire. And then I go back and I print the next layer of color. So they get layered on top of each other. As the block gets destroyed, the image on the paper kind of builds up. So then the third layer, I just did a little bit where you can see the red on the quilt and the red in the fire. That's all I really needed where that red was. And then you can see the block at this point is stained all different colors and just more and more carving is happening. The layer after the red was this kind of bright blue layer. And I made the blue pretty opaque because I didn't want as much of the orange to show through. I work very either transparent or opaque. You can kind of layer transparent colors on top of each other to allow the colors to almost mix on the paper, like a watercolor in a way. So, but that blue I wanted to be nice and bright. So this is the second to last layer. And then you can see on the right, I've gone in and I've carved the rest. And if you look closely, you can see her face is gone. So because I knew that I wasn't going to print anymore on her face was done. So I can't go back, right? If I mess up, there's no going back and printing her face again because it is carved away. And then once again, the final layer is all one color of a transparent purple, But because of that bright blue and the top part of the background and the kind of more brown in the bottom part of the background, those showed through. And so it kind of mixes on the paper. And then within this series, this is the latest series that I've done. I was really thinking about how lighting kind of affects rather mundane spaces, and nighttime has this sort of surrealness to it. So this image is me looking up through the trees at a light that we had strung in the tree, and that was kind of casting these really interesting colors. Everyone thinks it's the moon, which I think is really interesting, kind of view on perspective, and how our perspective is quite small, and that's what it's called. This is the back area behind a bar in Akron, and I just loved the leaves and the vines and how they were lit, and it was just kind of darkness behind. And then with the fence on this one, I actually went in with pan pastels. So broke some rules there, but it was really fun to kind of play around. Last year I got to go to Cuba for a trip, and I really was thinking about the lighting of the spaces there and this kind of interior and exterior lighting, and the fact that there's kind of these entryways and then courtyards beyond them that had kind of cool lighting. So that's where this image actually comes from. And then once again, I'm getting kind of really into fire at the moment. I have some plans for more fire pieces. This piece, the kind of the sticks and leaves are done in a reduction woodcut, and then the fire itself is actually a stencil. And I've done a version where it's a screen print on top. So getting a little bit more experimental in mixing mediums. This is another image from Cuba. So there is like always warm lighting on the streets themselves. And then there would be this kind of cool toned lighting coming from within whatever courtyard or outdoor space was kind of in the building complex. And I just always thought that was really interesting to kind of think about, like, what is the interior and what is the exterior of the area. So that's what kind of made me think about this. And these were literally just created earlier this year. So this is very new part of my work. And then another bonfire. That's going to keep happening. I'm going to keep doing the fires. I kind of really interested in it right now. And I love how the leaves kind of tangle themselves up. And just how the lighting of the bonfire, it's such a human thing to kind of sit around a bonfire at night. And it kind of creates this really amazing surreal atmosphere. And you can see that, like, this work is very different than the large tree pieces and the self-portraits. I think I don't like to try to limit myself. I almost have like at least two, right, kind of modes or lines in my work now where it's like I can do this when I feel like it, and I can do that when I feel like it, and I'm interested in both. And yeah, now we have come to the end of the talk, and I did okay on time.
You did great. Yeah. So folks, if you have questions, pop them into the chat and I will get to them. Meryl, something that I found really interesting was your kind of oscillation between abstraction and representation. So you started more on the abstraction side and have
Yeah.
moved more towards representation. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you might still go between them? Like what's your
Yeah.
there about that journey, and tell us more. Where are you going?
Yeah, I think growing up, everyone technically starts with abstraction, even though might not like think about it like that. And in high school, you're very much like, oh, you're the art kid, you're the kid that can draw because you can draw things. And when I got to college, I was actually a sculpture major. And so I'm working with like metal and wood and I started to just think more about movement and how things kind of flowed. And I think that kind of naturally led me to think in terms of sculpture, more abstract. And then when I did the print work in undergrad, I was like working from an image. So you're like, okay, that's the distinction. And then in grad school, I kind of first semester of grad school, I think is unsettling for most. And it's not that I couldn't draw, but I almost couldn't bring myself to like have to spend time getting proportions correct and kind of that like kind of tormenting, agonizing, like drawing a face is the most difficult thing because everyone sees a face. So if your face, if it's wrong, it's so wrong. But if you're drawing like a weird rock formation, natural form, flower, leaf, like no one's going to know if it's an inch to the right. So it kind of allowed me to like loosen myself up. And then working with Karen and color being so important, I think that kind of allowed me to loosen up and I like to just make and not worry about what it was. Most of it is kind of based on some sort of natural form or pattern, but like I needed to work faster. It allowed me to work faster too. Um, and then taking the 3 years off of really making serious art, I feel like maybe like slowed me down a little bit. And coming to a new area and a new place, I wanted to document it. So I think that's kind of what led me more back into like almost more realism. But I always like to have abstract elements, whether it's kind of that whoosh in the background or the shapes of the leaves or something, or the color, right? So in those first pieces, people aren't bright red, but that the color kind of like, I think elevates it from being just like more realistic. So I am always kind of evolving. I think I'm getting really into like the form of fire right now and how to document that. And I think that's going to lead to some abstraction, right? Because fire in itself is very abstract. Um, but I love the movement that can happen with abstraction and kind of layering that with like details of subject matter is really intriguing to me at the moment.
So another thing that I find really interesting in having seen kind of the trajectory of your work is that you dial into things of comfort. So comfort of a quilt and being, surrounded by that nature and the like the growth of that or the most folks, when they think about a fire, think about sitting around a fire and enjoying time with others. So, can you talk a little bit about when you are identifying subject matter? It seems to me that an important component for you is to elevate something that may have a flavor of modernity. Could you talk
Yeah,
about
I've been thinking so much about that lately because when you see artists kind of working with the mundane, it's usually some sort of like office space or a desk or something like that. But I think it really stems from me moving around. When I was a child growing up, I never moved. So I knew my environment very well. Um, and so when you know your environment well, when you get into a routine, you don't see as much. You're not looking unless like something happens that's really different. You're like, oh, when did that happen over there, right? And then when you move and you're like, everything is new and you're just like laser focused on like everything. And so leaving home when I was 18 to go to school, completely different environment, completely different weather, completely different experience, really kind of clued me into being almost like hyper aware of these little moments in the environment. Um, and then these moments that almost happen everywhere too. Like any city is going to have a wall covered in ivy somewhere, or like a chain link fence, right? These moments happen across areas. And so I think that's also why I kind of notice them in different areas. And it was really like in when I was in Nebraska in grad school, I was thinking about like water, because I was away from it. And then when I moved to Portland, I was like thinking about open sky because I was away from it. And here in Akron, I think is the first time where I've like kind of like almost honed in on like, this is where I am in the present, what's happening in the present, and being very aware of that present moment and allowing yourself to live in it is exciting. And so these kind of moments of human interaction where you're just kind of like not thinking about what's happening next or what's even happening now. You're just like sitting around a bonfire that people have been doing for generations. So I think that it comes from kind of moving around and being like aware of your surroundings, but then also like allowing yourself to kind of live exactly in that present moment and not thinking like, oh, what do I have to do next? Or what have I done before?
That's great. So one additional thing that I find really interesting, and I think it calls to your athletic piece, which is creating works that are feats. Like that, if you are unfamiliar with printmaking, to imagine a print that is 4 by 8 is no big deal. You're like, yeah, it's a big piece.
Yeah.
However, if you have ever tried the practice of printmaking, um, it really kind of puts you on your heels and helps you understand. Tell us a little bit more about the importance of that kind of stretch that you're choosing. Like like Olympic style print. Tell us more why that's so important.
I love that Olympic style printmaking. One of the lines in my thesis in grad school that I still very much remember is, I am strong and big and powerful, so my marks are strong and big and powerful. So everybody moves in a physical way. Everybody's body holds them upright, hopefully, right? That's the goal. Or every maybe your body doesn't, but your body is, everyone has like physical space, has movement, and how they like translate that movement. Every artist is doing something physical, even if you're doing digital work. Like there's a physical aspect to how your hands, your arms, your legs are moving. And some artists, I think, kind of push that to the limits, right? If you're doing a big painting and you're doing this stroke that happens, it's very like that motion is captured in it. If you're doing a tiny little drawing, you can imagine like a little ballpoint pen drawing or something. You can imagine like that meticulous kind of tightness in the piece. The really great thing with woodcut is sometimes you almost capture that movement in a very different way, because I'll either be like meticulous in the drawing, or with some of those kind of more paint swipey pieces, I'll be very like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh on the board. And then I have to go in and kind of meticulously carve it out. So it's this really great juxtaposition of kind of almost big movements and small movements. And it's very intimate because you're carving into the wood and you're carving something away. And so there's this great like intimacy about it. And just even printing the pieces, I'm rubbing the burnishing basically the paper, kind of rubbing it in. And it's a very like physical, I don't say violent, but like effective act. and that all kind of exists in the final print. And I mean, it's different than painting, but also similar in certain ways, where it's like a brushstroke is captured on that paper, and you can imagine how the artist moved to create it. With the woodcut, it's just kind of more actions, right? I have the brushstroke, and then I have the carving of the brushstroke, and then I have the printing of the brushstroke. So it's everything involves movement. And I, yeah, I still get the workout in, even though it might not be as like in a team sport.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we know that more fire is coming up. If you don't already, make sure you follow Meryl on IG and have a look at her website. I want to thank you again, Meryl, for the generosity of your time and talent, and for all of you joining us for this Artist Talk by Meryl Engler. It's a part of our programming for In Ohio. I'd like to give a special thank you to the curator, Char Norman, and a big thank you to all the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor, who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.